Welcome to the Better Than Rich Show with your hosts, Andrew Biggs and Mike Abramowitz. The Better Than Rich Show helps ambitious leaders who are on a mission to leave the world better than they found it, change their perspective on what's important, increase their income and impact, and systemize their life and business. If you've ever struggled with finding your purpose, have felt disconnected or distracted, or found yourself going through the motions, this show will remind you that what you do matters and will re-inspire you to chase your highest dreams. It's time for you to become better than rich.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Better Than Rich Show. I'm your host, Andrew Biggs, and I'm here with my special co-host, Mike Abramowitz. Mike, how are we doing this Wednesday morning? How are you?
Feeling great, man. Feeling great. Wednesday morning. It's always good when you get a morning workout in before the sun comes up.
Absolutely. I have like a little bit of sunlight like hitting me at a strange place. I'm going to try to move around, see if I can fix that. Hopefully it'll work out for us. But yeah, man, did you stay up and watch the election results, or what did you end up doing?
You know, it's I watched till about I fell asleep at maybe around 9:45.
Okay, yeah, right.
That's how invigorating it was. I was watching. It was like watching a sports game, and then it was the same. It was almost like, for me, it was like watching like a sport like soccer. Mm-hmm. Because it's like a lot of action and nothing going on at the same time, or hockey. It's like a lot of action, but nothing going on at the same time. Right. So it doesn't hold my attention too well, but yeah, I had a good night's sleep. So that was good.
That's good. I definitely think that is a good way of looking at it. It definitely felt a lot more like you were watching a sport and there was like a back and forth battle going on, you know, and it's like, oh man, this one's going to overtime. Like basically we're in overtime right now, and you know, we will see what happens. It's going to be interesting to see how things shake out, but you know, it's going to be an interesting one. So we are going to give you guys a little bit of a respite from the election talk that is probably going to dominate the news today, and probably going to dominate your office space around the water cooler or whatever today. And today we're going to dive in on some specific content from Better Than Rich, kind of our part 2 series that we had promised you all around the tools of a great coach. So I got my notes pulled up here, Mike. I'm ready to dive in. And we're going to give you 12 different tools. Again, this might be a cursory glance at these 12 different tools. We can really go deep into these and spend more time in understanding each one of them another time. But I think that this is something that everyone needs to know. What's up, Jeremy, by the way? Jeremy, I owe you a Facebook message. I know that. So I'll get back to you on that one. Awesome. So the number one tool that I want to teach you guys today to start off, is deep rapport. Deep rapport is the number one tool of a great coach. And basically what deep rapport means, and in some ways, this is almost like a meta tool that you can use in any relationship. But deep rapport really means that you're really synced up with this person and you really understand them. And there's like a complete trust in the relationship. And when you have this high degree of deep rapport, it's not about, you know, oh, you like golf and I like golf. We're in rapport. We're similar. It's not about, oh, you know, you like the Dolphins and I like the Dolphins. We're in rapport. We're similar. It's not about talking about the weather. It's not about talking about your kids. It's about being synced up energetically where you can really like kind of feel, and you're almost doing this dance with somebody in conversation. And you're kind of, there's this sort of, into attunement, right? And you're entrained to each other. So like when I move, they move. And when you move, I move. And we're kind of doing this weaving and this dancing. And this deep rapport really just means that there's a lot of trust. And really, it's the number one thing I'm always trying to tune myself to. And if I feel like I'm not in deep rapport with my client or with anybody I'm trying to lead or influence in any sort of way, my number one goal, besides any other agenda item on the list, simply becomes to get in rapport, because you can't influence somebody if you're not in deep rapport. So that's my thoughts. Mike, what do you think about deep rapport?
Yeah, I want to make sure that when I'm in rapport with someone that there's the old saying that people that are either like themselves or like someone they want to be. So almost, I know you've taught me, it's like helping them feel like we're a part of the same tribe. And I remember you taught me that. It's like help them feel like we're a part of the same tribe. We're in this together. And if I can create the space to be able to connect in a deep level like that, I mean, that's the number one part of, in my opinion, of being a coach.
Totally. Some clues on that, to help people see we're in the same tribe: mimic, match, and mirror. I was talking to someone the other day. They're doing a road show for their company in Chicago, and they're from Florida. And they were up in Chicago, like Oak Brook area. And he jumps on the call and just says, yeah, man, like I can't connect with Chicago people. I'm just like, okay, well, first off, I'm kind of from the Chicagoland area, so I can help you out with that. But like, why not? It's like, hey, they talk too fast, or like they're always busy, or these sorts of things. It's like, okay, so then you need to communicate in a way that they'd like to be communicated with, right? Be more direct, hey, I know you're in a rush, like kind of point out some of the different things that they might be going through their minds, and end up having one of his best shows ever. So it's just like mimic, match, and mirror the way people like to be communicated with. Sometimes this is simple stuff like rate of speech. Are they using simple or complex sentences? Are they speaking from their nose, their mouth, or their chest? What's their posture like? Obviously, mimic, match, and mirror their body language. So these are some different things that can help you kind of, lower that critical rational filter that we all kind of inherently have that says, is this person a friend or a foe? And that's how we're always kind of entering an interaction, especially with a stranger. So, in a sales context, it's really important, but even, resetting a relationship and making sure that you're showing everybody that you're a friend initially when you're starting a conversation is very important. So that is deep rapport. Mike, do you want to share number 2?
Sure. Yeah. Number 2 is framing. So number 1 is deep rapport. Number 2 is framing, and framing is creating, think about a frame, like you're creating a box around the conversation. And not only do you want to create a box around the conversation, you want to make sure that there's an agreement that we're going to stay within that box to start the conversation. So the frame might sound something like, hey, I'm really excited to connect with you today. A couple of things that I wanted to get accomplished. I want to get accomplished this, that, and the other thing. Are you okay with that? Is there anything else that you want to make sure we hit on during our conversation? Cool. We'll put that in the box too. So we'll get through all of this today. Is that cool? Would that be a win if we could get all that accomplished today? Great. So now we have what we're going to get accomplished, and we put everything in that box. And now we have a frame around where we're going to go. So that way, if the conversation starts derailing onto something else, we know what's in the box. And if that's outside of the box, we don't necessarily have to go down that path in this conversation. That could be tabled for another conversation.
Totally. So framing is starting the conversation and setting the agenda, right? And so often we kind of get into a conversation and we're kind of in the middle of it and we don't even know what the point of the conversation is. Especially if you're trying to influence someone, it's really important that you're really direct about that. I can't even tell you how many times I start a sales conversation with somebody and I just tell them within probably the first minute, I say, here's what's going to happen. My goal is to understand more about you. I want to understand, where you're at in life, what your hopes, your dreams are, your vision for yourself, what's working, what's not, what are your biggest challenges, and everything that's going on in your life. To do that, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. So the more open and honest you can be, the better. And by the end of the conversation, we should have a pretty good sense of whether or not it's a fit. If not, no worries. If so, I'll tell you a little bit about how I work with my clients. Does that sound good? Something like that in the first 60 seconds sets the frame. They go, wow, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate the transparency. Yeah, I'm an open book. What questions you got for me? Right? And so you need to frame all of these sorts of conversations, whether it's in a sales context or it's just an influence leadership conversation. Framing helps you stay within the box. And then once someone says yes, then if they try to go outside the box, you can say, hey, just for example, a lot of times people want to know the price. So it's like, hey, Mike, I appreciate that you're interested and you want to learn the price. Hey, that being said, we kind of agreed to an agenda. Do you mind if we just stick to the agenda and I talk about price later? I'll have a time at the end for you to answer, to ask any questions you may have. Oh yeah, that sounds good. Sorry, I jumped the gun. So this is typically what's going to happen when you start to frame conversations better. Number 3 is softening. So softening is in being able to, this is why you need deep rapport, but being able to feel into how you need to deliver something in a way that it's going to be received. And sometimes if you're going to give a little bit of like a challenge or something that is a little of a tougher pill to swallow for people, you need to deliver it kind of on this nice little pillow, right? And in this nice way that's going to be received. And so it's like softening that person to ready them to actually receive something. So a lot of times softening, I'm using kind of these, typically what you would call weaker language. So it's like, hey, I just want to maybe point out a potential blind spot, right? So potential blind spot instead of blind spot. I think and feel that maybe you might have a blind spot here. So it's like, I think and feel rather than I know, potential blind spot instead of blind spot, and maybe here. And then it's a softer sort of thing for someone to be able to receive that, they kind of appreciate. They're like, hey, you're giving me like harsh feedback, but in this kind of form that I can actually receive and not need to get my ego involved and be defensive. So that's what I see on softening. What do you think, Mike?
Well, I think that's completely relevant, especially with right now. Well, especially with, the election and everything specifically, because you don't have to agree with somebody necessarily, but you don't want to attack them. So softeners would be very helpful during this time period where it's like, you voted for blank, you're an idiot, versus, oh, wow, you voted for blank. Cool. That's interesting. I'd be curious, if you'd be open to maybe sharing, some of the reasons on why you chose to do that, like using and if they give you their reasoning and it's like, well, you're an idiot. It's like, well, I would probably use some softeners around, any type of direct conversation around a sensitive topic. Any type of topic that might have some sort of disagreement or potential argument around it. Softeners, I wish there was more, people would use those a little bit more in conversation. I think it would create a lot less resentment and more open-mindedness. But.
Totally. And also just the realization that, each subsequent generation seems to get more and more sensitive, from an attunement perspective and kind of from like a trigger perspective. So if you're leading young people, millennials and Gen Z will say, making sure you use softeners in your delivery is really important. A lot of baby boomers and Gen X will complain that, millennials and Gen Z is too sensitive, right? They can't take criticism. They can't take feedback, the smallest little thing, they need a mental health day, like all the jokes there. And well, there's certainly some criticism to be levied at millennials and Gen Z for some of that. But the other thing is, well, that's not changing, right? So if you want to be able to influence a large portion of the workforce right now, millennials and Gen Z, and an ever increasing percentage of the workforce, then you better learn how to communicate in a way that's going to be received, rather than trying to fight what it is. So just another point there on softening. Do you want to take the next one, Mike?
Sure. Number 4 is couching. So we got deep rapport is number 1, framing number 2, softening number 3, couching number 4. And couching is similar to framing, except it's almost like handling the objections before they come up. So you want to handle any type of potential concern that they might have before the concern exists, like pop in the concern bubble. And, I'm sure you'd probably be able to come up with many examples of how you do that in coaching. Do you have any specific examples of how you do that, Andrew, when you're working with someone?
Right. So basically it's like giving the counter argument before you present your argument. So couching is like, an aside statement that you kind of make before you make your argument as to how they should potentially see it. Again, this is super, salient right now in terms of how you can, navigate conversations to show that you actually are thinking about, other ways of thinking or governing. But in a business context, we talked about systemization the other day. Let's say I'm having a conversation with somebody who historically hasn't been great at systems. They're more of like a personality type leader, and they kind of lead on their charisma. So I might say something like this before I present the concept of systems. I say, hey, obviously we can't systemize everything in our business, Mike. There are some things that really need that personal touch, that need, charisma, that, there's circumstantial and situational leadership where you are always going to be needed to step in. And there's no way we can create a system for that, right? You're a unique personality. You're a great leader. You're somebody who can't really be duplicated 100%. At the same time, would you agree that there are a lot of things that we can systemize that currently you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off trying to fix, that if we just had a program for, it would make things a lot easier? What do you think of that, Mike? So I've couched the counter argument, because otherwise, if I just go with the argument of systemization, they'll say, yeah. I mean, I thought about that, but honestly, there's just so many things in my business that I can't create a system for, Andrew. Well, I've already handled that objection right before it's come up. And so, here we've influenced them to help them see, like, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. And also it's currently a crutch. So any thoughts on that?
No, that was perfect. I'm glad that was a really healthy example. And for those of you listening, I had to break that down. You want to try to think what the other person's concern or argument might be ahead of time. And that takes a little bit of preparation. So you want to almost put yourself in their lens. And how you can do that, I know, especially what Andrew, you just said about millennials, Gen Zs. And if you need to learn how to work with them anyway, you use the word mental illness and used some the Gen X's or the Boomers might use that word, and they might even use it in maybe a condescending way for Gen Zs and millennials. So maybe we could swap that out. For every audience is just understanding life circumstances. So seeing it from their lens. Do they have, from their addictions or their jobs or relationships or how they're seeing the world, and just putting ourselves in their shoes so that way we can potentially see what are their arguments or counters to whatever it is that we might be coaching them through or presenting to us. And that might take a little bit of preparation on your part as a coach. Totally.
Let's go with number 5. Number 5 is challenge. So challenge is kind of on this polarity that with the next one, number 6, that we're going to talk about next. But challenge is this willingness to actually call someone out. And sometimes it's a very important tool to call someone out and to tell them, hey, like, this is where you're screwing up. I'm going to call you out for where you're not showing up at your best, where you can be better, and help them like really. It's kind of like the coach who's like, you're better than that. Like, why did you, jump off sides? Like, you're more disciplined than that, and is willing to kind of push somebody to their best. It's more of the masculine side of leadership, and saying like, hey, you're not as good as you could be. You could be so much better, and we need you. So that's challenge. Now, learning how to do that congruently is really important. That's why we need deep rapport. That's why we need some of these other tools to be able to like soften that challenge in a way that it's going to be received. But if we're never challenging people, there's some people who think that, okay, it's 2020. We got to be soft to everybody. We got to be kind. We got to be attuned. We have to accept the worst parts of themselves and tell them that they're perfect just the way they are. And that's kind of the next part we're going to talk about in section 6. But in this thing, it's like in the relative sense, no, you're not as good as you could be. You could be way better, and you're not even trying. Step up. And so we have to be willing to have those conversations. And maybe a good idea when you're entering a conversation is this more of a challenge question, or is it more of a support question? And you can ask yourself, a conversation. Is this more of a challenge conversation, or is this more of a support conversation? What does this person need right now? Do they need to be challenged or supported? So any thoughts on challenge? And then I already let the cat out of the bag on what number 6 is, but what do you think?
Yeah. And finding the balance between challenge and support. You want to lead with questions in order to figure out which is needed at the right time. So it comes back to what you said about being in deep rapport. So if you created this frame, so if you have done the work at the front end of the conversation, then you could dig with a couple of questions, and based upon the digging that you're going to do, you'll figure out, if they're using language like beating up themselves, like if they're using like self-judgment or, self-talk of like, yeah, I messed up, or I'm not good, or like something around guilt or shame, Well, you're probably going to want to use a little bit of support because they're already challenging themselves. They're already being tough on themselves. They don't necessarily need you to also be tough on them because they're already being tough on themselves. If they're using more like excuses or blame or pointing fingers somewhere else or outside of my control circumstances, then that's probably where I would do more challenge. But you got to hear their language, in my opinion, by using questions to dig to figure out which one you need. Do you need challenge or do you need a support?
I love that, man. I think it's 100% accurate that, just reading between the lines, listening and trying to figure out, does this person, like, where's this person at? Are they already challenging themselves? In fact, maybe they're challenging themselves too much, or maybe they're supporting themselves too much. So, by the way, number 6 is support, which is basically just the other side of that. And it's kind of reminding people that they're doing great. And that it's, hey, it's not as bad as it seems. I have a saying in business, it's never as great as it seems. It's never as bad as it seems. And really that just kind of keeps you kind of in a sober mindset. And sometimes people need to be reminded like, hey, you're doing great. You're doing well. Like, here's what I love about you. Here's where you're awesome. And just like encouragement is really what I would see there. So, sometimes, people need that. They need to be reminded that they have strengths, and if they can just persevere, that they will succeed. So, what else do you think about support? Number 6.
Yeah, you've said to me many times, you're great how you are, and you also have a lot of work to do. And right. You said that to me. I've said it to some of the people I work with too, and it kind of touches on both of them. And when you give reasons behind it, you could support and encourage and also challenge, but you want to kind of find the balance between the two and use it in the right context. But you're great how you are, and and here's why, and you have a lot of work to do, and here's why. And it just keeps someone in rapport with you, but it also keeps the conversation evolving and keeps the relationship evolving.
Absolutely. Do you want to take number 7 then?
Sure. Number 7, questioning. So that kind of ties into what I was mentioning. So number 7 is questioning. And, questions are by far, in my opinion, one of the most important tools that you can use in a coaching conversation. And when I say a tool, it's really a tool to influence, right? Oftentimes when we're in conversation and coaching someone, we're going to use assumptions. And instead of using assumptions, you just want to ask thought-provoking questions that allow them to either validate your initial assumption or allows them to answer and just give you what their truth is. And I think questioning is something that takes a little bit of patience. It takes a little bit of understanding, a little bit of empathy, and some level of creativity. But I think working with you, Andrew, that's one of the things that kept me working with you for so long, is your ability to ask such penetrating, thought-provoking questions that allow me to really dig deep with some of my below the surface responses. And that's one of the things that's kept me coaching with you. So what my question to you would be is, if someone wanted to get better at asking questions in a coaching conversation, where would they be able to start? Now, obviously, we could have a whole episode on just question asking, and we probably should. But just on the surface level, where could someone improve just their ability to ask good questions?
One kind of simple rule I have is, if a question seems interesting to me, I'm going to ask it. So if it's kind of popping in my head, then I want to ask it. And that's a lot of times kind of the way I frame it. It's like, hey, the question that popped up for me is this. And so it's, if a question seems interesting, ask it. If there's like a follow-up question that begs to be asked, then ask it. So someone might say, so I'll just give you an example. A lot of times I'm talking to people about purpose. So we'll say, I don't know what my purpose is in life. I feel lost. I feel disillusioned, disconnected. I'm just going through the motions in life. Say, okay, well, the question for me that comes up is, does this person even believe that life has a purpose? So, then that's going to be the next question. It's like, well, hey, you don't know what your purpose is, but let me ask you, do you believe life has a purpose? And probably more than half the time, the person's like, I don't know. I don't know if life has a purpose. And so then what happens is Well, they're trying to find their purpose without even asking the first question. So let's solve that question first and ask all the relevant questions down that question tree. And if they can arrive at the conclusion that life has a purpose, then we can move on to what's their purpose, and so on and so forth. So it's like we have to really go back to like the lowest level of someone's belief system. I probably do this a little bit more intuitively, and at this point, there's kind of like an unconscious competency that I need to try to articulate of like, how could I actually teach someone how to do this? But we're going like all the way down to the person's like core beliefs, right, about life itself, and then their core beliefs about themselves in relationship to life, and then their core beliefs about, others, and then the core beliefs about, how they should act. And we're kind of building this scaffolding of beliefs that is going to really formulate their identity. So it's definitely an interesting question of how can someone get really good at asking questions. One of the best things I would just say is start practicing, and don't be afraid to ever ask a single question. That's a big thing, because a lot of times when I'm like nervous to ask a question, it's the exact question that needs to be asked. And they're so grateful that you were willing to actually do it. So Mike, any other thoughts on this?
Why do you think someone would be nervous to ask a question? Do you think it's because it would be intrusive or invasive or presumptuous? Like what could be a reason why someone might be nervous to ask a question?
Sometimes people might be afraid to ask a question because they might think they're going to offend somebody. I asked somebody the other day, I said, hey, like, do you feel like you're an elitist? Like, do you feel like people sometimes come like, get rubbed the wrong way by you? Like, that's kind of an offensive question, right? But it's like, because we're in deep rapport and because there's total trust and because I use a softener, that person was able to receive the question like, I don't know. Maybe I do come off as an elitist sometimes. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. But it's like, the whole point is trying to figure out what is, the question you need to ask. Sometimes people are afraid to ask it. And that's why you need deep rapport. They don't want to be offensive, which is fine. But if you use all these other tools in conjunction, you can pretty much ask any question you want.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great response.
So number 8.
The opposite of teaching or opposite of questioning is teaching, right? I wouldn't say opposite, but it's important to decipher of which one you need to do, because too many times the coach wants to go to teaching when they need to ask questions. And sometimes they go to questions when they really need to teach. And it's kind of the similar thing with supporting and challenging. Mm-hmm. You have to have a little bit of intuition, which is important when leading and coaching someone. But to the point is, number 8 is teaching. And teaching, that's easy for most of us that are leaders. I mean, we're teaching from our own experiences, or we're teaching from what we believe is truthfulness. And I really love that, what you mentioned, that episode. I don't even remember what it was, but it was a YouTube video that you had me listen to about discerning truth and truthfulness and the paradigm around that. I wouldn't be able to teach it yet, but it was really spot on. That guy is super smart, whoever that guy is. But yeah, so we're going to be teaching from our truthfulness of what we believe is real, and from our lessons and our learnings, which is important, of why we continue to read and listen to podcasts and feed our mind and lead our lives, so that way we have some sort of content to be able to present to people. Because if we're just getting our stuff from what we saw on TikTok and the celebrity figures, be like, yeah, this is what I saw a TikTok famous person talking about this. You should check that out. Well, there's not much credibility behind that source. So I would say, if you're teaching, make sure that you're using some sort of credibility that you can offer it from, whether it be from your own life experiences or something that you've learned or read or whatnot. I think there's just, it's important to not be hypocritical. There's too much hypocrisy sometimes with teaching. It's like, well, this is what I learned somewhere. It's like, cool. Well, are you demonstrating it? Are you living it? Mm-hmm. And, well, I don't know if you have a thought around that.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thought I have on teaching is that means you need to learn stuff, right? If you're going to teach something, you need to learn it. And by the way, to close the loop on Mike's comment there, the video he's referring to is The War on Sense Making. It's by Daniel Schmachtenberger. So if you want to check that out online, you can. So yeah, you have to be learning, right? And like, I want to constantly be learning and kind of be on the cutting edge of my field. Particularly, I learn a lot about psychology and things of that nature, as well as culture. So I'm like on the cutting edge of that information. And then a lot of times I'll teach something to somebody and they'll say, how do you know that? And I say, well, that's what I spend 40% of my time doing, is I spend 40% of my time learning. So, that's how I actually have content to deliver, and, can also come up with my own content and synthesize this information to be able to present it. What I think a lot of people do is they just kind of take other people's content and copy and paste it, right? In some way, shape, or form. Or they learned a lot, 6 years ago, they went to, Unleash the Power Within, and then they learned a lot and they were like super in a growth phase, but then they haven't learned anything since. And so it's like, we need to constantly be on the cutting edge of whatever it is that we're interested in and that our audience is interested in. So that's teaching. By the way, I know that we got a little bit of a tight window here, so we're going to try to do these next 4 really quick. But the next one is analogies, number 9. So sometimes when a student's having a hard time understanding a certain concept, you need to use an analogy. So I was having a hard time breaking through with someone, a couple months ago, and I just remember this like it was yesterday, because it just clicked when I used an analogy. And I was just like, hey, you're like a car that's in second gear and you want to go faster, but you just keep pushing harder on the gas instead of letting off the gas, hitting the clutch and moving to third gear. And they were like, or whatever, right? It's a simple analogy, but because it was, an analogy rather than being like just telling them what to do, then it clicked. And then all of a sudden their business changed. So that's why we use analogies. That's why we use metaphors. That's why we use similes. And we have to be willing to come up with analogies that really work for somebody. And, oftentimes our brains are much more adapted to understand analogies than they are, just concepts themselves. So I know we got to bounce here. So, number 10, if you want to take it.
Yeah, number 10. Number 10 is stories. And I already alluded to that, but stories is sometimes a personal story or sometimes a story from someone else or from history, just to allow them to kind of connect those dots. I remember going to a Tony Robbins event a long time ago. I don't even know which one, but he told a story that really connected with me. And he told a story about Thomas Edison as he was inventing the light bulb and the filaments, and he kept a journal. And there was a journalist who went there and to document him as the village's largest failure. And he said, "You're the biggest failure a village has. I want to document." And while they're doing the report, there was a big explosion that took place as he was trying to invent the filament for the light bulb. And she says, "You're insane. You're going to burn down the town." And all he did was reach for his journal and wrote down. And she says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I just figured out 2 things. Number 1, what not to do next time. And number 2, how to create an explosion." And then Tony was able to tie that story into the power of journaling. And I still remember that. He's like, that's why you want to document everything and lessons. And there's so many great lessons that come from that story. And, you could tell stories from yourself, from other people. So that's number 10 is stories.
Awesome. Number 11 is check-ins. So check-ins are really simple, but it's basically kicking it back to the person for them to summarize what they're learning, to see how it's landing, and to make sure it's being understood. So a lot of times I'm just checking in. Hey, Mike, how's this landing for you? Where are we at on this? So I don't want to go on a big soliloquy and then get to the end and learn that I lost them 10 minutes ago. So check-ins is really simple, kicking it back to them, saying, how's this landing for you? What are your thoughts? What do you think? Sometimes I used to say, does that make sense? And then I realized it was kind of like could be received the wrong way. So watch that. I still sometimes let that come out, but it's like, instead of saying, does that make sense? Because a lot of times people don't want to admit it doesn't. So they're just like, yeah, that makes sense. So instead of doing that, I want to say, hey, how's this landing for you? What are your thoughts on this? And it's just a check-in to help them kind of summarize back what they're learning. Any thoughts on that? And then you can kick it to number 12.
I was hoping you could take number 12 because number 12 is almost like your coined situation that you kind of like almost created it for me. Yeah. Number 12 is meta weaving. So what this really means is being dynamic in a conversation. And it's when you really master all of these tools together, you can kind of string them together. And it's kind of like, jazz improvisation, like
one guy gets inspired by another and they go on a little riff and then they change keys and then they change, rhythms and patterns and sequences. It's very much like that. So meta weaving is this capacity to, in the same conversation, challenge and support, question and tell stories, use analogies and check-ins, teach something, but also soften something, couch something, frame something, use all of these tools together. So I might be like, Mike, you need to step up. The way you're showing up right now is not your best and you know it. And also I really appreciate what you have done. You're doing great in this area, this area, and this area. And I want to appreciate you for that. And also at the same time, we both know that you can do better. So it's I just used challenge and support, married them together, softened it a little bit. And then, hopefully Mike's going to receive that really well, or whoever's on the other end of that. So thanks, David. I'm glad this is landing great and you're getting something out of this. This is great. So I'm going to run through these real quick, just so we have them in sequence here. Number 1, deep rapport. Number 2, framing. Number 3, softening. Number 4, couching. Number 5, challenge. Number 6, support. Number 7, questioning. Number 8, teaching. Number 9 is analogies. Number 10 is stories. Number 11 is check-ins. And number 12 is meta weaving all of these together. So this has been fun. Mike, any closing thoughts before we let everyone go for the day?
Be leaders. Leaders lead. Make sure that you are learning consistently and be willing to influence tomorrow's leaders through your leadership. If you're willing to take a listen to this, then you are a leader, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And if you are a leader, remember to leave today better than you found it. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the show, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Instagram at betterthan_rich and join our Facebook group at the Better Than Rich Show. Thanks again for listening. We look forward to seeing you next time. And remember, leave today better than you found it.